Ashes of dusk still clung to the sky when I first laid eyes upon the neglected library at the far end of a lonely street. Its silhouette loomed against the vestiges of daylight like a gargoyle perched on a church spire, warning visitors away with a perpetual scowl. The building's massive doors, crafted from ancient oak, had warped and cracked, revealing splinters as sharp as teeth. Weeds draped themselves over rotting steps and slithered through cracks in the foundation. Drawn by an inexplicable pull, an almost whispered promise from the darkness within, I pressed my hand against the door's rusted handle. A chill seized my spine, but I shrugged it off. Something compelled me to step inside, to breathe the library's stale air and walk among its shadows. Little did I know that by crossing the threshold, I had bound my fate to the lonely spirit who hovered among the shelves. As the door groaned inward, I was assaulted by the pungent smell of mold, paper, and thick dust. My flashlight's weak beam crawled across the foyer, revealing tattered rugs and the remnants of a battered desk. Dust motes drifted in columns of moonlight, stirring in the frigid air as though they were restless spirits themselves. Warped bookcases leaned precariously to one side, their shelves a maze of torn covers and yellowed pages. I swept away a heavy cobweb that clung to my face and began to wander through the aisles. How I even knew to come here in the first place was uncertain. There had been rumors of a cursed poem scrawled within the pages of some lost tome. Whispers said the poet's spirit roamed these aisles. The library was rumored to be fiercely guarded by the presence of an old sorrow that refused to let go. Despite the trembling warning in my heart, a part of me yearned to discover the truth behind that rumor. A corridor of oak bookshelves led me farther into the depths. Each step produced an echo, and with every reverberation I sensed a soft sigh, as if someone hovered just beyond the reach of my flashlight. My breath came shallow, my pulse thrummed like a drum. I wandered past a toppled globe and a reading table laced with spider silk. Suddenly, movement caught my eye. A flicker of light near a reading nook. Cautiously, I moved closer, straining to see if it was the reflection of my flashlight or something else. Then, out of the corner of my vision, I saw a figure, a pale silhouette in a trailing coat. He turned a ghostly face in my direction, and before I could blink, he was gone. My heart hammered, adrenaline surging. I gasped, nearly dropping my flashlight, and stood motionless, limbs trembling as though captured by the hush of centuries. Willing myself to keep going, I ventured deeper until I reached what must have once been a grand study area. 2 monstrous fireplaces bracketed the room, each cradle for a dying fire that had long since extinguished. Rows of tables, topped with tarnished lamps, stretched out, many chairs overturned as if the students or patrons had fled in haste. At the center of it all stood a massive, worn podium. A single tome left open upon it. The pages were brittle and finely written upon in swirling ink, the letters reminiscent of delicate vines creeping exquisitely across the page. As I approached, the temperature plummeted. A bluish glow drifted toward me, swirling in the gloom. Then he appeared again, the poet. His eyes, hollow with longing, bored into me. The tips of his fingers brushed the edges of the open book, but with a sudden jolt of fear I realized no real flesh made contact. I took a step back, but something compelled me to remain. This spirit exuded not malevolence so much as desperation. He gestured, a faint quiver in his translucent lips as if to speak. I leaned in, unconsciously drawn, while my mind screamed at me to flee. But I stayed, my curiosity supplanting my terror. The ghost's gaze, grievously ancient, seemed unable to look away from the open tome. Slowly, he extended his hand, as though beckoning me to step forward. Cautiously, I inched nearer until I stood by the podium, near enough to glimpse trembling lines that cut off mid-sentence. The poem before me looked half-formed. An abrupt stop to the poet's final verse. The last line read, "Let the silence speak of secrets lost. Let the ink of night." Then a heavy blotch of ink, as if the poet's hand had been wrenched away. My flesh prickled. I could sense the agony in that empty space, an unbroken silence, yearning to be filled. I turned to face him. His outline flickered, and words formed on his lips without sound. My heart thundered, but I forced myself to speak. You want me to finish it?" My voice wavered. I did not know why I felt so compelled to oblige, nor how I had found the courage to force sound from my lungs. The spirit nodded, sorrow etched across his spectral features. A part of me knew in that moment that the rumor was true. A curse lingered in this place. This poet had died, leaving his last verse incomplete, and his spirit remained trapped, wandering these forsaken corridors, unable to depart without the final lines. I could sense an immense longing that tethered him here. Perhaps writing the concluding words might free him, but did I possess the skill or the mettle to do so? I touched the brittle page. With an almost electric jolt, I felt something course through me, an unseen force pressing me to begin. Dust lifted from the floor in swirling eddies, battered gently by an expanding cold. My fingertips trembled around a pen that miraculously lay next to the podium, rusted nib still intact. At that moment, an echo of the poet's voice resounded in my mind, a cadence of longing and torment. "Secrets lost. Let the ink of night take shape beneath waning light." I blinked in reverence, uncertain if these words were truly forming in my head or if they were tethered memories belonging to a soul that refused to let go. I stared at the blank space in the poem, my own breath catching in my throat as the poet's frigid presence hovered behind me, urging me forward. Then I heard a soft sigh, and his silhouette melted into the darkness behind the shelves once more. In the hush that followed, the library seemed alive with expectant silence. My mind churned. Was I truly meant to finish this verse? An unknown fear clawed at me. What if completing it wove me into its curse? I recalled rumors that he who dared to finish the poem would forever be bound to the poet's fate. Nonetheless, an unexplainable compulsion burned in my veins, a longing to see it ended. Perhaps there was a way to do it safely, I told myself. If the poet's spirit needed release, maybe forming the words to set him free would also protect me from the clutches of his sorrow. The alternative, refusing, left a hollow ache that stifled reason. So I set my pen to the page and scratched out half a line. "Take shape beneath waning light. Let mortal tongue turn midnight's plight." My breath faltered, and the lamp on the table flickered, as though wind had swept through the room. Suddenly, a strangled cry echoed from the corners of the library. My flashlight wavered. I whipped around, only to see an avalanche of books tumble from a shelf in the corner. The poet's silhouette shimmered. He hovered near the fallen books, stooped as if searching for something among them. Warily, I set down the pen, my heart pounding in my ears, and inched over. As I approached, I watched a ghost linger near a leather-bound volume whose spine had snapped clear. He gestured, urging me to retrieve it, so I knelt to pick it up. The cover was embossed in gold leaf, now tarnished to a sickly brown. Inside, the pages exhaled a damp, musty scent, and I realized they contained more of the poet's writing. Several stanzas, all incomplete, half-spelled lines that tapered off into darkness. Pressed amid the final pages was a thin, dried flower, its petals black with age. This was no random artifact. It meant something to him. I glanced at the spirit for direction, but his face was a warped mask of sorrow and yearning. I slipped the book beneath my arm, feeling a vibration against my side, as if the text itself trembled with the poet's heartbreak. With that, he vanished in the gloom once more. A sense of urgency flared within me. Time felt warped, as though the library existed on a different plane. My breathing was shallow, the silence weighed heavily, and every corner seemed to harbor a presence. Determined, I returned to the podium. Perhaps something in the pages of the leather-bound volume would guide me, help me understand how to properly complete the verse without becoming its prisoner. I carefully flipped pages, scanning cryptic lines that spoke of midnight chills, longing hearts, and unending solitude. They spiraled into incomplete stanzas haunted by elliptical phrases. The poet's despair was vivid, as though he had poured every last droplet of his soul onto the page. Then I reached the final leaf, where the black-petaled flower rested. A faint script bordered its edges. Blood of the rose, tether my soul. Anguish undone when the final words toll. The lines were shaky, as though written by a trembling hand. I felt a tingling all over. Something in me recognized that the cursed poem was bound to the symbol of this flower. If I chose the right words, they might sever the poet's chains. But how? A new dread seeped in. What if, by finishing his verse, I only cemented a new link in that chain, damning both of us to roam this place forever? The ghost had chosen me for reasons I couldn't fathom, and with each moment spent here, my strength to resist was eroding. Even an ill-fated attempt at release seemed better than abandoning him to eternal sorrow. I took up the pen once more, but before I could press its nib to the parchment, frost crystallized across the podium. The poet reappeared, his arms stretched wide, his mouth forming silent words, as though screaming in warning. I froze. Behind me came the sound of slow, creaking footsteps on the old floorboards. My heart choked in my throat. I whirled around, shining my flashlight into the darkness, bracing myself for another apparition or some monstrous presence. The gloom pulled, revealing a tall figure with sallow skin, eyes glassy and vacant. He moved with the mechanical jerk of a puppet, drifting past half-collapsed shelves. Was he another ghost trapped here? My light flickered over him, and I realized his features were indefinite, half submerged in shadow. Then, in a voice that seemed to scrape against my ears, he hissed, "You dare finish his cursed verse!" The figure advanced a few trembling steps, an aura of menace roiling around him. Each word that fell from his lips came out hollow, like the echo of a long-dead memory. I pressed my back against the podium, the poet's presence hovering behind me, as though in silent confrontation with this new arrival. A cold wind gusted, scattering pages through the air, swirling them around us like dead leaves stirred by a graveyard breeze. A single candle somewhere in the distance flared to life, revealing the intruder's sharp cheekbones and sunken eyes. He wore a tattered coat, faded as parchment, and in his hand he clutched a battered quill. "He has lured countless souls to attempt his final words," the figure rasped. They all believed they could free him, yet each time they added only another link to the chain. A bitter laugh escaped his lips, a sound colder than the hush of a tomb. My hands went numb on the edges of the podium as the poet's ghost stepped toward the menacing figure, face contorted in silent rage. A flicker of recognition passed between them, a silent war of regrets. The intruder sneered. "He is no victim. He is a vessel of despair. Finish the verse, and you shall entomb your own spirit here. But if you refuse, you leave him and all he's taken doomed to wander in endless purgatory." My mouth went dry, my heart thrashing against my ribs. Could it be true? If there had been previous attempts, none had succeeded, but had they lacked the final piece gleaned from the black rose and the script on the last page of his leather-bound notebook? Perhaps. Summoning tardy courage, I turned to the poet's anxious face. His eyes burned with plea, as though he could not articulate his innocence, but yearned for me to believe in him. Torn between horror and pity, I inhaled, deep and trembling, and lifted my pen again. "How do I free him?" I demanded of the intruder, my voice unsteady. A rustle of air answered me, and he simply vanished, leaving a faint cackle echoing through the gloom. In his absence, the poet's spirit hovered, his form faintly flickering like a candle about to go out. Ghostly tears traced down his cheeks. I sensed his terror at losing hope once more. My heart constricted. I pressed the nib to the page, letting my mind sink into the swirling cadence I had felt earlier, those stray words whispered in the deep corners of memory. My pulse throbbed, and I scratched out line after line, guided by equal measures desperation and empathy. The words materialized, each stanza weaving sorrow with longing. Let the ink take shape in night's eternal gloom, mend the breach between the living and the tomb. Unchain the rose, let its final petals fall, to end the hush that binds us all. I wrote as a fever overcame me. My eyes swam with tears, and overhead thunder rumbled as if the sky itself became a judge in our unholy right. The poet hovered at my shoulder, urging me on. An unearthly gale swept through the reading hall, scattering loose parchment. My voice, once trembling, found resonance in reciting, "In darkest hush, break silent gloom, sparrows cry, release from doom." The poet's soul, unbound by woe, set free in mortal hands below. The pen glided across the page, unstoppable. I felt the poet's essence coil around my chest, resonating with every word. Then, at last, I penned the closing line, bridging the break in that original verse. My cheeks were wet with tears. For a moment the library was still as stone. I waited, breath suspended. The poet's spirit took a halting step, his features slack with a fragile hope. A swirl of faint blue fire furled around him like a swirl of starlight. It blazed behind his eyes. Perhaps we had done it. Perhaps he was free. Then a searing agony lanced through my hand. The pen fell, clattering to the floor. An invisible force yanked me backward, and I collided with the podium, toppling it and scattering the brittle pages in every direction. My body felt aflame with 1,000 needles. I glimpsed the poet's ghost jerk violently, the atmosphere around him warping. His eyes stretched wide in alarm. I realized with horror that something was trying to bind me to him. The words I had written shimmered with an eerie glow, as though they carried an incantation that bridged our souls in a macabre link. My mind swirled in frantic panic. Had I fallen prey to the same trap as so many before me? The poet's ghost shook as if in torment. Then, with the suddenness of a star going supernova, light exploded around him. I shielded my face. Waves of freezing cold whipped through the library. In that tempest, I caught fleeting images of silhouettes. Pale, anguished spirits, drifting like leaves in a hurricane. They circled, crying out in silent misery, pinned in orbit around the poet. He stood in the storm's center, mouth open in a silent scream. Then, one by one, they dissolved into vapor, until only he and I remained, bound by an unspoken vow, his gaze locked with mine, tears flowing free, and I felt my heart convulse with empathy. I understood. All those who had tried before were never fully prepared, never armed with the final key. They had become his thralls, drifting in cursed stasis. But something in the lines I had written was different. The black rose. The hidden incantation, a fragile chance at redemption. In the swirling chaos, the poet's ghost mouthed words I could not hear. Yet in my mind they resonated with startling clarity. "Speak the last line." My entire body trembled. I forced myself upright, battered by intangible gusts, the taste of dust and despair thick in my throat. Pages whipped around me like wailing ghosts. The battered pen rolled toward my foot. I seized it, ignoring the burning in my palm, and managed to catch a glimpse of the line I had scrawled last. "And then the rose shall shatter the chains, bringing final rest where sorrow remains." I recited these words aloud, voice breaking. An infernal wind howled, pushing me to my knees. The battered library groaned, as though the building itself was cracking open. The poet's eyes lit with a radiant glow, and in that moment he gave a mournful smile. With the final words released, I sensed a fissure open between worlds. Initially, a monstrous terror pressed around me, but it softened into a wave of melancholy that receded into calm. The spectral storm quelled. The swirling papers drifted to the floor in a hush. Slowly I opened my eyes. Slowly I opened my eyes. The poet's figure hovered close, transparent tears dripping from his chin. He raised one trembling hand, as though he wished to touch my face, but couldn't, separated by an unfathomable boundary between life and death. My heart throbbed with compassion. A gentle dimming overcame his shape, and slivers of golden light flecked his form. As if freed from a centuries-long nightmare, his entire being shimmered and dissolved into soft luminescence. I caught a glimpse of relief in his expression, lips parted in a final thank you. Then, with a final wisp of vapor, he was gone. My chest felt hollow, my breath a ragged gulp in the sudden stillness. The cursed library's gloom remained, but without that choking weight of sorrow. A profound hush blanketed each corridor, as if the walls had exhaled a sigh of release. I remained kneeling for a long time, mind reeling from the magnitude of what just transpired. In front of me, the open tome had flipped to a page whose every line was complete, the ink glimmering faintly. A sense of closure emanated from it. Carefully, I closed the book, half expecting to sense some sort of supernatural jolt. There was none. The black rose, previously dried and aged, now crumbled into a pile of fine dust. I understood then that its purpose had been fulfilled. Perhaps its role in the curse was undone, and with it, the spirit of the poet. At last, I rose unsteadily to my feet. The library's corridors felt strangely peaceful, no longer menacing in their silence. Slowly I made my way back toward the entrance, weaving around fallen shelves and scattered papers. My footsteps echoed, but the echoes no longer felt haunted. They were merely the soft reverberations of a quiet, abandoned place. Still, I felt the poet's presence imprinted on the corners of my mind, as though part of his tale now lived in my memory. Yet I emerged from that library unclaimed, spared from entombment in his sorrow. However, I could not escape entirely unaltered. The experience settled in my very bones, an unsettling knowledge that I had brushed against a hidden realm. When I pushed open the warped oak doors, the night or perhaps early morning greeted me with an almost gentle breeze. The sky was a tapestry of stars. Standing outside, I glanced back at the library's facade. It no longer seemed as threatening, though it retained its neglected gloom. A pang of gravity weighed on my spirit. Someday, that library might be torn down, its memory lost to progress. But for now, I realized, the curse that had lain across its threshold was lifted. The poet's spirit, no longer bound, had slipped free into whatever peace awaited him. I stepped onto the crumbling steps, my pulse calming finally. In my pocket lay a worn scrap of paper, the final lines I had composed, as if they had etched themselves into my journal unbidden. I took it out and studied the words one last time in the moonlight. They were raw, neither perfectly formed nor especially elegant, but they were honest. I could only hope they had been enough to soothe the poet's centuries of torment. As a final token, I whispered, "May you rest in peace," letting the wind carry my voice back through the decrepit door. With a final backward glance, I turned and walked away. The library stood there, the moon's silver glow dancing across its scarred wood and broken windows. With each step down that lonely street, my mind echoed with lines of the poem I had just completed, lines that melded sorrow with hope in a single heartbeat. The hush of the library faded behind me, though it would never entirely vanish from my memory. Perhaps, in a strange twist of fate, a poet's last verse had not only freed a trapped spirit, but quietly reminded me that words, even when born of despair, have the power to unbind us.